Good morning, girls. Hope you can see the presentation.
Morning, ma'am.
Good morning. We have the presentation. I think we started with Philip Sidney on that day. So we actually saw he was a Renaissance man, and also many of the ideas about Philip Sidney on that day. So, and also I told you that his important critical treatise is Apology for Poetry. So we will have some details of it today. Don't worry, this is not going to be the material which you are going to study. I will be preparing a much what we can say easier version of this, just to present, and I have prepared this. So I will the notes which I will give you will be much more simpler than this. So don't worry about the material, the content. By seeing the content, don't get afraid. This is only for presenting. I have just given a detailed understanding of Philip Sidney. That's why I have given these details here. I will condense everything accordingly how you can study. Whatever which I have given till now, did you go through it? Did you have any difficulty? I asked you many times. If you have any difficulty, you can tell me. Is the material simple, or do you need much more consideration? Go through the materials. Did you go through the material? We have completed 2 units so far. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I was asking about the materials. Was it okay for you? Can you read it? So it is. Is it simple? As I told you, you can start reading it because the questions which everything I have taken from the material. So you can just start reading it. You know that now we have an online exam for the final years. I think soon after that we will be instructed to have the internals, I hope, and I think it will be also be online. So you can start reading the materials which we have given. So maybe around in 10 days time, or 1 week time, 1 week or 10 days time, I think your internals will also be being get discussed. So you can start preparing, I hope. You can start reading. Okay. If you have any difficulties, you can let me. Let us see the next slide. So today we are going to have a much more deeper understanding of the work and Apology for Poetry. Sorry, girls, my throat is not doing well, so in between you may get some disturbances in my voice. Okay, so in Apology for Poetry, Philip Sidney, in his Apology for Poetry, reacts against the attacks made on poetry by the Puritan Stephen Gosson. So when you remember Apology for Poetry, you have to remember one important person, who is the Stephen Gosson. He is a Puritan, and Sidney is defending his poetry, defending the charges which Stephen Gosson made in his work. Okay, the School of Abuse. That is the name of work by Stephen Gosson, and Stephen Gosson attacks poetry. For that, Sidney has written a reply in a book called Apology for Poetry or Defense of Poesy. You have 2 different names for it, so we have to remember that also. So that is it. So that's the first thing you have to know. So an Apology for Poetry is written by Philip Sidney. It is also called The Defense of Poesy, and it is written as a defense against Stephen Gosson's attacks on poetry. Hope you are able to remember. I think it's clear for you. Next, To Sydney, poetry is an art of imitation for specific purpose. It is imitated to teach and delight. So, as we have seen, from Plato to Longinus and Dante, we have seen uh, for different people, the function of poetry is different. Okay, here, according to Philip Sidney, the function of poetry or the art of poetry has a specific purpose. And what is its specific purpose? It should teach as well as delight. So that is the function of poetry according to Philip Sidney. Hope you are able to follow that. So the next line, according to Sidney, poetry is something which should be imitated to teach and delight. So according to him, poetry is simply a superior means of communication, and its value depends on what is communicated. So, according to Philip Sidney, poetry is something which is very superior. So we know that Plato has told poetry is something inferior, but here we find that Philip Sidney, according to Philip Sidney, poetry is superior means of communication, and its value depends on what is communicated. So all the poetry cannot be considered as greater poetry. Only by the material it conveys, if the poetry will get its greatness. Do you understand? So that is what, according to poetry, according to Sidney, that is what poetry is. So it depends on the subject matter, what is conveyed or what is conveyed through the poetry. The poetry becomes a superior art. எல்லா poetryயும் greater poetryன்னு அவர் சொல்றாரு. அவர் என்ன சொல்றாரு? அதுல கொடுத்திருக்கிற subject matter பொறுத்து poetryயோட greatness மாறும். That is what the idea. But the purpose of poetry is to teach, and it should have some moral purpose, and also it should have some points to make it entertaining. So these are the ideas of Sidney. What is Sidney's idea of poetry? Hope you understand. What is it? It should teach and delight. It depends on the subject matter, what is conveyed through the poetry becomes a superior. Hope you understand these details. Your voice is breaking. Is it clear now? Is it clear now? Hasina? I can't hear you. What about others? Can everyone hear me? Is there any problem in my voice?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I think that Hasina, I think you have some problem over there in the place in which you are sitting may have some technical glitches. So I think you can change your place a little bit. For everyone, I am clear. Okay, Hasina, thank you. So I think these points are clear for you. So once again, I repeat. So Apology for Poetry is Philip Sidney's important work. It is written against as a defense to poetry for the attacks created by Stephen Gaussen. And according to Philip Sidney, poetry is something which should teach and delight. It is a superior means of communication, and it depends on the value. The value depends on what is communicated. Hope you are clear with first paragraph. So even history, when it is described in a lively and passionate expression, becomes poetic. He prefers imaginative literature that teaches better than history and philosophy. Literature has the power to reproduce an ideal golden world, not just the brazen world. Okay, so you can just see that history, even if it is produced along with some imagination, it will become somewhat, what we can say, very delightful. So he prefers imagination, and if that is added to literature, literature, that literature will produce that have the power to produce a golden world. So just imagine that you might have seen Harry Potter movies. See how it is a strange world. It is an imaginary world, but we all love that world. It's a kind of a strange imagination. Can you just think that a school called a magic school can exist and where there is magic everywhere? Those things are all imagination, right? So, likewise, we find that literature is something when created with imagination, it becomes golden. And the brazen world means just the ordinary world will have a value. The world around us, the ordinary world, will have a value when we add some imagination to this literature. Okay, Hasina, thank you. I changed your place. So that's it. So now again we understand that in the first line, these things which we can see that poetry is something which delights, which teaches, and if it has an imagination, can produce a golden bird. So those are the points which you have got from this first slide. Next, what are the charges of Dawson against poetry, to which Sydney answers? So these 4 points are very important to remember. So the charges are: poetry is the waste of time. Okay, according to Stephen Gobson, poetry is something which wastes your time. That is the first charge. Second charge is that poetry is mother of lies. So poetry is something which he says that it is a mother of lies. It is nurse of abuse. So it can make the people distract. So that is why it is called a nurse of abuse, or here nurse also means mother of abuse. And according to Stephen Gobson, Plato had rightly banished the poets from his ideal world. We know that Plato has written a work called Republic, and he has rightly banished the poets from his ideal world. In that world, he actually in Plato's Republic, you find that he gives representation for many people, but he actually banished poets from the world because he, according to Plato, poets are some people who will destroy the humankind. That is his idea. Okay, so according to him, he banishes. So Stephen Gobson supports by saying that Plato has rightly banished the poets from his ideal world. So these are the 4 charges. What are the 4? It's a waste of time, it's a mother of lies, it's a nurse of abuse, and Plato has done the right thing by banishing the poets from his ideal world. So these are the 4 charges you have to remember by Stephen Gobson against the poetry. To this, Sydney has attempted a reply like thing in his apology for poetry. அவர் கொடுத்துக்கிற மெயின் 4 சார்ஜஸ் இந்த சார்ஜஸ் தான். இப்படிதான் வந்து அவர் அட்டாக் பண்ணியிருந்தாரு. அந்த அதுக்கு தான் வந்து Philip Sidney வந்து இப்போ ஆன்சர். He is going to answer these questions, answer these attacks. So against these charges, Sydney has answered them in the following ways. So first enna paathom, it's a waste of time. Yeah, poetry is a waste of time. So according to that, Philip Sidney says poetry is the source of knowledge and the civilizing force for Sydney. Gobson attacks. Sorry, the spelling is wrong. I will change it. When I typed it, it has got wrong, I think. Gobson attacks on poetry, saying that it corrupts the people and it's the waste of time. So you can just compare. Gobson says that it is waste of time, it corrupts the people. Sydney says it's a source of knowledge, it's a civilizing force. Okay, so that's a comparative study you can make. Gobson enna solraru, poetry வந்து people வந்து டைம் வேஸ்ட், அவங்க அதை வாசிச்சாங்கன்னா அது அவங்களுக்கு வேஸ்ட் ஆஃப் டைம். அது இல்லாமல் அதை வந்து அவங்கள கரெக்ட் பண்ணும். கரெக்ட்னா என்னது, அவங்க வந்து இட் வில் மேக் த பீப்புள் லெஸ் இன்டெலிஜென்ட். But according to Sydney, poetry is a source of knowledge. It's a civilizing force. civilizing and developing much, what we can say, a very good force. It's a positive force according to Sid. Then Sydney says that no learning is so good as that which teaches and moves to virtue, and that nothing can both teach and amuse so much as poetry does. So, Sydney says that what a learning is good when it teaches something. uh, as I am telling you again, don't get confused by these words or these enormous language. This is just to explain. I will give you much more simpler version of this, so don't worry about it. Just understand the points. I hope you are able to understand what I am telling. இதுவரைக்கும் சொன்ன points எல்லாமே புரிஞ்சிருக்கும்னு நினைக்கிறேன். Do you have any difficulty in following this? Are you confused or anything like that? ஏதாவது கன்ஃபியூஷன் இருக்கா? இது வரைக்கும் சொன்ன பாயிண்ட்ஸ்ல ஃபாலோ பண்றீங்க?
No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
There is no difficulty. Okay.
No confusion, ma'am. It's clear, ma'am.
Thank you. So, here we find that the first year, Sydney is answering the first charge. What is the first charge? The charge is, okay, the poetry is the waste of time. It corrupts people. But according to Sydney, poetry is source of knowledge. It's a civilizing force. And he says that a learning, if I teach you something, a learning should happen, right? If a teacher teaches something to a student, the student should be able to understand, and there should be some kind of idea which should reach the student. இப்போ நம்ம ஒரு டீச்சர் வந்து டீச் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கோம் அப்படின்னு சொன்னா, அந்த என்ன டீச் பண்றாங்களோ அந்த ஐடியா வந்து ஸ்டூடெண்ட்ஸை போய் சேரும். அப்பதான் அது குட் டீச்சிங். ஸோ அதனால அவர் என்ன சொல்றாருன்னா, பொயட்ரி வந்து அந்த மாதிரி ஒரு டீச்சிங் தான் அப்படிங்கிறது அவரோட ஐடியா. He says that poetry does that much to teach and amuse. It teaches you and also entertains. Both ways it is so good. So that is why he says that poetry is something like a teacher, because it teaches you as well as it amuses. In essay societies, poetry was the main source of education. He remembers ancient Greek society that respected poets. The poets are always to be looked up, so poetry is not wasted of time. So he says that Greek society gave so much of importance to poets. It's only Plato who has not given any importance, but there are other people who gave much importance to poetry. So poetry is something which is very superior and should be looked upon, and it is not a waste of time. So according to Philip Sidney, poetry is not a waste of time. Poetry is a civilizing force. Poetry is the source of knowledge. It teaches and moves a person to virtue, and it amuses and many things. And it also, poets should be respected and given an important place in the society. So poetry is not a waste of time. So on the waste of time அப்படின்னு இருக்கிற சார்ஜுக்கு பிலிப் சிட்னி வந்து நிறைய எக்ஸ்பிளனேஷன் கொடுக்குறாரு. என்னெல்லாம் அது? Source of knowledge, civilizing force, it does not corrupt the people, it teaches good things to people, it amuses the people, entertain. And amusing means entertain. It's a source of education, and poets are to be respected in that manner. So these are the things which he gives as answer to the first charge. Poetry is a waste of time. Hope you follow. Next, to the second charge, Sydney answers that poet does not lie because he never affirms that his fiction is true and can never lie. The poetic truths are ideal and universal. Therefore, poetry cannot be mother of lies. Okay, so next charge is that poetry is the mother of lies. So எல்லா பொய்களுக்கும் ஒரு பெரிய ஒரு பொய் மாதிரியான விஷயம் தான் என்னது? பொயட்ரின்னு சொல்லி ஸ்டீஃபன் காசன் சொல்றாரு. பொய்மை அப்படிங்கிறது தான் அவர் சொல்றது. So Sydney says us no, that it is not a lie, mother of lie. There will be fiction. Fiction in the sense imagination. Imagination is the power of literature. That's what he says. So there should be imagination. It is the power which gives what we can say, that beauty to literature. So poetry cannot be affirmed as a, what we can say, cannot be said as a mother of life. இருக்கலாம், கண்டிப்பா லிட்ரேச்சர் அப்படின்னா என்ன இருக்கும்? அதுல இமேஜினேஷன் இருக்கும், நிறைய இது கலந்துருக்கும், ஃபிக்ஷன் கலந்துருக்கும். ஃபிக்ஷன் த சென்ஸ் நல்ல அழகான என்னென்னமோ விஷயங்கள்லாம் சொல்லுவாங்க, இமேஜினேஷனுக்கு நம்முடைய சிந்தனைக்கு அப்பாற்பட்ட விஷயங்கள் அதில் கலந்துருக்கும். இருந்தா கூட தட் இஸ் நாட் த மதர் ஆஃப் லைஸ். So that is the second charge. So Sydney rejects that poetry is a source of abuse. To him, it is people who abuses poetry, not the vice versa. And the third thing is that it rejects. It's a abuse. It's something which abuses. Abuses means create a very bad impression in the people. That is what is called abuse, right? So it creates some bad impression in the people. That is what, according to Gosson. But Sydney says that he rejects by saying that poetry does not give any abuse. It is something, it is the people who abuses. Poetry வந்து abuse கொடுக்காது, poetry வந்து எந்த தப்பான விஷயங்களையும் நமக்கு கொடுக்காது. நம்ம தான் என்ன பண்றோம்னா அந்த poetry தப்பா புரிஞ்சுக்கிறோம் அப்படிங்கிறது தான் அவருடைய அண்டர்ஸ்டாண்டிங். ஸோ அபியூசஸ் ஆர் மோர் நர்ஸ்ட் பை philosophy and history than by poetry, by describing battles, bloodshed, violence, etc. On the contrary, poetry helps to maintain morality and peace by avoiding such violence and bloodshed. Moreover, it brings light to knowledge. So he says that it is history and philosophy, that everything which tells you about so many things like bloodshed, violence, battle, all the things, all the bad things are nursed by other things, not by poetry. Poetryல வந்து உங்களுக்கு லாங்குவேஜே பியூட்டிஃபுல்லா இருக்கும், இமேஜினேஷன் பியூட்டிஃபுல்லா இருக்கும். ஆனா அது என்ன பண்ணாது உங்களுக்கு, அக்கார்டிங் டு சிட்னி, it won't give you any abuse. So it is philosophy and history that teach you some abuse. It is not poetry. That is so. He says that poetry brings light to knowledge. Poetry gives you some glimpse into the better knowledge. Okay. He says that last view, this is the last thing we can see. Sidney views that Plato in his Republic wanted to banish the abuse of poetry, not the poets. And actually, Gosson has understood it wrongly. In Plato's Republic, Plato is trying to say that it is not poet to be banished, but the idea of abusing the poetry. If any poet abuses, make use of an abusive language in the poetry, those have to be taken out of that place. That's what he says. So he himself was not free from poeticality, which we can find in his dialogues. Plato never says that all poets should be banished. He called for banishing only those poets who are inferior and unable to instruct the children. So according to Sidney, Plato does not want poets to be banished, only bad poets to be banished. Ella poets are banished pannum solla, only the bad poets who make some inferior kind of thought, some inferior, and they forget to instruct the children, instruct the readers, then they should be banished. Hope you are able to understand the 4 charges. What are they? Poetry is the waste of time. For that, Sidney says, no, it is not the waste of time. It's the source of knowledge, civilizing force, etc. Okay. And so you can find here that this is the slide in which you can find that. The second thing, he says that it's a mother of lies. But he says that, no, poetry is not the mother of lies. It gives an imaginary world, but it is beautiful. Thirdly, it is an abusive language. It makes the people, it abuses the people. But Sidney says that no, it is not so. It is history, other subjects which actually brings that abuse. It is not poetry that brings abuse. Finally, we find that Sidney, according to Sidney, Plato has not banished all the poets, only the bad poets are banished. Hope you are able to find this 4 charges. Okay, so for Sidney, art is the imitation of nature, but it is not slavish imitation as Plato views. Rather, it is a creative imitation. So all the poets says that art is the imitation of nature. We all know that, right? So as Plato says, it's not a slavish, it is not a thing which is a wanted imitation. It's a creative imitation according to Sidney. So nature is dull, incomplete and ugly. It is artists who turn dull nature into golden color. He employs his creative faculty, imagination, and style of presentation to decorate the raw materials of nature. For Sydney, art is a speaking picture, have spatio-temporal dimension. For Aristotle, human action is more important, but for Sydney, nature is important. Okay, so you can just have a comparative study of what we have learned earlier. What is art for Plato, what is art for Aristotle, Horace, Longinus, etc. For Sydney, he says that nature is important. Nature is dull. As it is, nature is dull. But you can just imagine that when Wordsworth gave us a poetry on daffodils, daffodils is a very, what we can say, common flower which is found in England. But only it got an, what we can say, a huge appreciation when Wordsworth wrote a poem on daffodils. ஓகே, ஒரு சாதாரண ஒரு பூ தான் அது, வந்து எல்லா இடத்துலயும் எல்லாரும் பார்க்குற ஒரு ஃப்ளவரா தான் இருந்தது. ஆனா இட் இஸ் த பியூட்டி ஆஃப் த லாங்குவேஜ் ஆஃப் வேர்ட்ஸ்வர்த்ஸ் poetry that gave a beautiful impression to the flower, what we can say, daffodils. So nature is dull in its way, but it is given life. It is brought to liveliness when it is painted or when it is presented by a poetry or by an artist. Nature வந்து அதோட raw material raw formல பார்க்கும்போது அது கொஞ்சம் டல்லா தான் இருக்கு. அது கொஞ்சம் இமேஜினேஷன், அதுக்கு கொஞ்சம் கலர் அதெல்லாம் ஆட் பண்ணும்போது ரொம்பவே அழகானதா அது மாறிடுது. அது வந்து எதனால பாசிபிள் அப்படின்னு பார்த்தீங்கன்னா, இட் இஸ் ஒன்லி பாசிபிள் பிகாஸ் ஆஃப் த லிட்ரரி பர்சனாலிட்டிஸ். So artists are to create arts considering the level of readers. The only purpose of art is to teach and delight, like the whole tendency of Renaissance. Sydney favors poetic justice that is possible in poets' world where good are rewarded and wicked people are punished. So in literature, poetic justice is, what we can say, is possible. In a literary work of art, what we can say, we can give the characters poetic justice. So good are rewarded and bad are punished. Plato's philosophy on virtue is worthless at the battlefield, but poet teaches men how to behave under all circumstances. So he is giving a very good understanding of the poetry. Moral philosophy teaches virtues through abstract examples, and history teaches virtue through concrete examples, but both are defective. So he says that philosophy teaches some examples, but they are abstract. It's just imagination. History teaches us through concrete examples, by facts, but both are defective. Poetry teaches virtue by example as well as by percept, blend of abstract and concrete. Both things you can find in the poetry. So the poet creates his own world where he gives only the inspiring things, and thus poetry holds its superior position to the philosophy and history. So how is poetry superior to philosophy and history? Because poetry is the blend of imagination and facts. So இந்த complete slide உடைய understanding என்ன அப்படின்னா, poetry is the blend, combination of imagination as well as facts. So it holds superior position than to philosophy and history. So in the poet's golden world, heroes are ideally presented and evils are corrupt. Poet here means any work of art. In the literature it's a golden world which is presented by the people. So ideally, so when there you can find rewards for the heroes, and all the bad things will be punished. So didactic effect of a poem depends upon the poet's power to move. It depends upon an effective quality of poetry. Among the different forms of poetry like lyric, elegy, satire, comedy, etc., epic is the best form as it portrays heroic deeds and inspires people to become courageous and patriotic. So நிறைய types of poetry நம்ம படிச்சிருக்கோம். அதில் epic poetry, according to Sydney, epic poetry inspires a person a lot. So in this way, Sydney defines all the charges against poetry and stands for the sake of universal and timeless quality of poetry, making us know why the poets are universal genius. So this is how he defends poetry by saying that poetry is something superior to history and philosophy, and he says that poetry is something which makes us which makes by its universal appeal, it has a timeless quality. காலம் கடந்து நிக்கிற ஒரு விஷயமா poetry சொல்றாரு. Poetry in the sense work of art நம்ம எடுத்துக்கலாம். As literature as a whole we can take. So literature stands the test of time. You can just remember the works of Shakespeare. After 400, 500 years, even after the death of Shakespeare, it is what we can say. Even now, it is living. The works of Shakespeare lives, right? So that is how it is timeless. It's a universal genius. Okay. Yes. Thus, we have come to the end of this presentation. Hope you understand. Do you have any clarifications? I think so. Today we saw about apology for poetry, the 4 charges, and what are the answers given by Sydney to the apology, to this charges given by Stephen Gossett. So he praises poetry or the work of art. Okay. That's it, girls. Hope you are able to understand. I think today this is enough for us. So we'll go a little bit slow. Okay, fine. Okay, girls. Meanwhile, I would like to talk to you about the assignment which you have to do in the for the literary criticism. Actually, we have seen somewhere around 7 topics. Okay, 6 topics we have completed. Now we are going through the 7th topic. I think you can make presentations on it. I will give you a detailed topics, which is you can do it as a group work, as you always do for my classes. I think you remember for doing she and all. So likewise, you can form groups according to your convenience. We can see how the total number of students can be divided equally, and you can form groups. And I'll give you the topics. You have to prepare the slides, and I will give you a mail ID. You have to send that to the mail ID, and you have to present in the online class. Okay, every one of you will have to present the slides so that it can be a kind of revision, whatever we have seen, so that everyone will have a better understanding of the topics. We are not going to restrict to one lesson or one topic. I am going to give topics from all the things which you have learned so far. I'll give you a detailed topics for I will send you the topics. You can choose from that, your convenient, and if all the material which I have given you, you can take from that. Only thing is that you have to prepare slides and you have to present it in the class. That will be your assignment. I will give the topics 1, 2 or 3 days. Okay, girls, is it okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. So that I think you will have a greater understanding of the topics by yourself. Okay, fine, girls. I think you can share the attendance, and if you can share it and you can want, you can leave the class. Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll meet in the next class. We'll continue Philip Sydney, the next class. Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a nice day.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.